Hello and welcome to Standing at the Crossroads. This is a special educational webcast where we're going to be aiming to put the current state of transportation and logistics markets into better perspective for shippers. We're also going to aim to define some of the challenges that are changing the freight logistics environment, and then we're going to set out to define some new rules to the game. Now, this is a game in which the goal is to establish a more strategic, collaborative environment where shippers and carriers partner in the decision-making process to help overcome today's mounting challenges in the freight and transportation game. My name is Michael Levins, and I'm the Group Editorial Director for Peerless Media's Supply Chain Group, which includes, of course, Logistics Management and Supply Chain Management Review magazines, and I'll be your moderator for this session. It's being brought to you by our friends at SMC3. It should come as very little surprise to anyone attending today's event that shippers and carriers are really, truly at a crossroads. Coming in from one side, we find the carrier base looking to maximize profitability while their costs are rising in the midst of a maelstrom of operational challenges. Now, for this group, as everybody's well aware, capacity is tight and costs are only increasing due to factors such as the hours of service rule changes and as well as the ongoing impact of CSA and a number of other issues that are rising costs. Now, coming in from the other direction, we find shippers who are trying to get a better handle on inventory management and reduce their costs as well, all while managing increased demand uncertainty from all customer levels. In fact, many shippers are asking for cost reductions at the same time that they're asking for improvement in service. In this current state of affairs, we have indeed found ourselves at a crossroads, and now it's critical that we find a collaborative point as we move forward as a collective industry. Now today, we have a panel that's going to lay down some new rules that just might help both shippers and carriers start winning this new game we just discussed. Joining me today, we have Mary Holcomb, Ph.D., Karl Mandrodt, Ph.D., and Estes Express Lines President and CEO, Rob Estes. Now, many of our attendees know Mary Holcomb from previous webcasts. Mary is Associate Professor and Gerald T. Niedert Supply Chain Fellow at the University of Tennessee. Now, prior to academia, her professional career involved some 18 years at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Transportation Research and Policy Issues for the U.S. Departments of Energy, Transportation, and Defense. Now, Mary's background also consists of industry experience with the former Burlington Northern Railroad, of course, General Motors, and Milliken and Company. Now, like Mary, Karl is certainly no stranger to the logistics management audience. Karl serves as a professor in the Department of Management at Georgia College and State University, and he's also director of the online Masters of Logistics and Supply Chain Management at the school. Karl has more than 20 years in logistics, transportation, and supply chain research as well. Now, most notably, Karl and Mary have worked together on the popular Logistics and Transportation Trends and Issues study. That's done in conjunction with Logistics Management magazine, and we've been doing that now, I believe, for over the last 23 years. So, Karl, we're thrilled to have you as well, and we're honored to have Rob Estes with us today, joining Mary and Karl. Rob is President and CEO of Estes Express Lines. Rob began working at Estes Express Lines, washing trucks at the age of 12, and worked every spring break and summer through high school and college, and then after graduating from William & Mary in 1974 with a business degree, Rob started in sales in the Richmond area, progressed up the ladder over the next 40 years from terminal manager, regional manager to accounting. He was treasurer until he made his way to the corner office in 1999. Rob, we're thrilled to have your years of experience and insight with us today. Terrific. Now, just a quick reminder, we're going to have a Q&A session following the presentation and discussion today. So please make sure you submit your questions for the presenters as the guys are going through their slides today, and we're going to get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And now, if we don't get to your questions today, fear not, we're going to package all those questions up, and we're going to move those over to today's speakers, and they'll get back to your questions with answers via email. Now, Karl, I believe you're going to take it away, so it's all yours.
Hey, thanks, Mike, for the introduction, and it's always fun to have a panel that goes from watching trucks and washing trucks all together at one time. But, you know, it's been really a lot of fun to work on this for the last 23 years, as you just talked about. And, you know, we're going to talk about some of the rules today. We're not going to be able to go through all 5 rules on there, but good news, Mary and I and our colleagues are going to be presenting at the Connections Conference SMC3 is sponsoring back in June, and we'll be there, and I'm sure Rob will be there as well as an attendee, and so we're looking forward to see him there at that event. So let's kind of talk a little bit about where we're going to head for the next couple of minutes. And really for our agenda, we really want to talk a little bit about what is the current state, because, you know, Mike, you did talk about capacity issues and some of the challenges that we face. And, you know, we've faced those for a long time, but what is that state now? What are those rules that we need to go ahead and use to win? And then how do we really redefine where we're headed and where we're going to go? So as that is our guide point, let's kind of dig in. So first up, let's just talk a little bit about what the current state of logistics is. And some would argue that we're really facing some tough times. Mary, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure I do, Carl. Hello, everyone. We always start our studies by trying to see what the macro and some would say even the global environment looks like. And we have a number of issues that we present to our participants in the study, and then we try to look at those top 5 every year to see what's really on the minds of both shippers and carriers. And you see that list here. That cost to serve or distribute has been at the top of the list, along with changing customer requirements and demand uncertainty for several years now. I think it just reflects a lot of the reality that we're facing, things like the dynamic nature of the marketplace, a recovery that seems to take on some legs, and then with the next reporting period perhaps be a bit weaker than we want it to be. If you look at demand uncertainty, we have such long global supply chains, long lead times, that when we have these changes, it makes it very, very difficult to respond to them or be very responsive. We're working with a company now that they are doing some of their manufacturing for some of their subassembly components in China, and they're looking at lead times of 50 days, and they're one of the companies that are looking at what relocation would help them be able to do to be more agile and flexible as they're trying to respond to not only changing customer requirements, but as demand continues to fluctuate. And then there's our old friend inventory management, as Mike referred to in the beginning. We see that this particular challenge will come in and out of the picture in terms of the top 5, and this year it's back at the top, and some of the numbers reflect that it's remaining a challenge for many firms as we roll out more and new products along the way. So one of the things that we always take a pulse for is what's happening in transportation spending. I'll give you a moment to kind of look at this graph and see what's going on as I point out a couple of things that I think are important here. Let's start at the bottom of that chart. So when we ask respondents how much are they spending in terms of their transportation, you'll notice that this year that we didn't have any company, any respondent that said to us that they're spending less than 1%. To me, this is really a big change, and it speaks very directly to the comments that Mike made about the fact that costs are increasing and they're going to continue to increase. Now, as we move up the scale and look at what's happening, the most significant change I think that we saw was in the 4 to 5% category. And you'll notice here that companies that were spending in the range of 3 to 4%, suddenly they're seeing that overall percent increase there. And you'll also see that top one, the greater than 5%, that's not a statistically significant difference from 2013 that we saw, but yet we think it kind of reflects the size of companies that are participating in the study this year. We're going to talk about what's driving this increase in spending in the next few slides. And Rob, this is where we think that you're going to be able to offer quite a bit of insight to us. But before we go to those slides, I think we'd really like to just challenge the shipper side to really understand, you know, what's driving those increases and what factors or conditions are really constraining you from fully leveraging the spend that you have. And the other thing that I want to kind of note or ask as a question to our listeners today is, if you wanted to improve your service, let's say that you were going to increase your spending by 1%, what would you expect that the result would be in terms of those service levels? So, Rob, if you would, spend a few moments talking to us about what's driving those increased costs.
how long do you have? Again, it's a pleasure to be on this panel, and I certainly thank you a lot for inviting me. Encourage everybody that can to come out to San Diego and visit us at Connections, SMC's summer event in June. I know Mary and Karl will be on a panel. I will also be on a separate panel, a CEO panel that I'm excited about, so look forward to that conference. Costs are moving up. The chart that you show, obviously the one that everybody hears about is driver shortage, and it is a real issue. Certainly looking at it from an LTL perspective, air cost of drivers, and usually the LTL carrier is a little bit higher up in the pay ranges than most trucking, but we're having challenges, especially in some of the major metro areas. There was a driver shortage prior to the 08-09 collapse, and it kind of went into hibernation, but it is spring is here, and it is alive and well and coming out of hibernation. I'd also add that probably something that isn't mentioned as much, but there's a mechanic shortage. So really when you look at air dock, driver, and mechanic situation, we're having issues really attracting and keeping really the people, as my dad used to say, that make things happen, that drive the trucks, make the trucks run, and move the freight. Besides, and again, with those challenges, air pay increases, and I know the pay increases of all trucking companies have increased probably more in the last year to 2 years than they have in probably the previous 4 years. So certainly an impactor to cost. In addition, the new equipment costs are, we're replacing trucks for $20,000 more than we bought them for 5 and 6 years ago. So that cost is certainly hitting the bottom line. Technology demands of our customers, we're spending this year in excess of 3% of our revenue in IT enhancements. Just the changing needs of our customer base. I've heard customers say that the need for delivering information is almost as important and sometimes more important than delivering freight. And we certainly see that, and certainly spending a lot of time, effort, and money in improving air technology. And I would add the last thing, facilities, as the industry is the number of LTL carriers. Looking at my space, facility costs are a challenge. We could always move from the 30 to 40 door terminal up to the 60 door terminal, but now we're in markets where we need to be in the 100 and 120 door markets, and those facilities do not exist. And to build today with local regulations, with rising costs to build, and plus the fact that nobody wants a trucking terminal in their backyard really makes facility cost demanding. Thanks.
It certainly does, Rob. And one of the categories that you talked about in terms of cost was the driver. And I think that on this slide that we have now, it clearly shows what a really large piece of the pie, the driver salaries and their benefits, and also the recruiting and I think the retention costs that companies like yours face takes about half of, that dollar spend in terms of, trucking itself. And that's followed pretty closely by that second largest chunk, which addresses the fuel component. It seems like when the cost of diesel or price of diesel started dropping, we started getting questions almost daily when we were talking to shippers, why is this not reflected in the costs that I'm paying for transportation? And yet, as you see, as the driver costs continue to increase, and it seems like the news just about every other day is an increase that a trucking company has passed along to their drivers to try to retain them and to also get get that top talent, and we'll see how important that is in one of the later slides, that it really is negating some of those fuel decreases that we're seeing. Although now, in terms of the marketplace, I think the fuel prices are increasing again. Is that what you're seeing on your side, Rob?
Yes, it is. It bottomed out, started rising earlier in the year. We saw a retrenchment in prices, but again, the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure everybody is seeing it at the pumps, and I'm not sure the reason for it. That's above my pay grade, but we do see it continuing to move up. And your graph, obviously the HR, which has salaries, recruitment, benefits, which are significant, and I would say in a little small piece of the world, the blue piece is bigger than that than that pie graph, and I know that probably includes truckload and others, but it's certainly an important component, but also a big component.
That's a very important insight in terms of how it looks for, an LTL industry itself. I think there's not anything on this graph that surprises many of us that are, either a shipper or a carrier today, and speaks to, I think, a lot of things that we talked about. I think what's really kind of gives me the most concern is looking into the future as we move out, because we don't really see that gap or that shortfall becoming any smaller. I just recently did an interview on the driverless trucks and that particular technology, and I had someone say to me that it can't come fast enough, and I think that there's still so many things about that we are really going to have to deal with now and into the foreseeable future, this gap that we have between demand and supply. Karl, do you want to talk to us about what firms are looking for then in terms of becoming more multimodal?
I sure can. And so, it's interesting just listening to Rob add in a little bit. I was at a conference a while ago. We talked about mechanic shortage. We always talk about the driver shortage and never about the mechanics. And yet kind of the same theme came up on there. How many of you would want your daughter or son to be a truck driver? They reversed to how many of you wanted your son or daughter to be a mechanic? And maybe the lifestyle for a mechanic might be a little bit better for our drivers, but we're definitely going to see on the tractor driver side, some challenges for the couple of years ahead. But if you start looking at the modal transportation budget overall, what you see here is 2013 compared to 2014. And really, there's two bullets out there that are kind of highlighted. And one of them is that this is one of the first years that we actually looked at dedicated as a standalone. So we pulled that out of the truckload. And so from 2013 to 2014, truckload did go down a little bit. But again, the big reason for that is the significant increase on the dedicated side that we have in there. And then just overall economy, we're doing a lot of imports, and so international ocean continues to be an increasing share of the budget that we're having on that side. What's interesting, though, is the next slide, where we really start talking about what the LTL sector is doing. And from our data from several months ago, we started to see some definite growth. And there's another study done by Carrier Direct that looked at that as well and said, there's some areas that are improvement. Looking at route optimization, tracking software is definitely going to help out on the pickup and density or pickup and delivery density issues. So, Rob, just a kind of a quick thought. Where do you see that growth on the LTL sector headed from your perspective?
Carl, appreciate it. We're definitely seeing growth and opportunities, and certainly a environment where we have more ability to select the business that we want to bring into our system. Your graph, the average length of haul is pretty close to exactly where Estes is, being third of our business next day, third, second day, and a third 3 and 4 days. Average weight per shipment is a little bit smaller, but we are seeing that grow. It's hard to really define where that growth is coming from in average weight per shipment, but we're seeing larger shipments that we think in a different environment would have moved truckload or truckload and stop-off, kind of filtering their way down into the LTL space. I've compared the LTL industry to a hamburger. We're in between the bun of the truckload on the top and the small parcel on the bottom. And in past years, that quarter pounder was shrinking when it got cooked, but we are seeing that quarter pounder grow, and again, maybe from fallout from prices rising from the parcel sector with more dimensional pricing, and in the truckload segment where there's even probably more an acute driver shortage, shipments moving down and moving back into the LTL arena that aren't full truckload. So we are seeing a growing market in LTL, and certainly a market that's far different than it was 5 years ago.
So Carl and Rob, I have to jump in here, and I have to say that maybe people like me are the reason that you're seeing that happen, because with the e-commerce, I'm finding now that I don't have to do as much going to the store and making my purchases. I can jump online at any time, and I just know from a personal standpoint, and probably the two of you as well, if I think about things that I'm ordering now are things that I never would have thought about before in terms of, whether it's a furniture item or something else, and the weight of those shipments certainly are outside of the parcel domain for the largest part.
Kind of the big and bulky, Mary, and you're absolutely right. I didn't say that, but that's almost a add-on to the LTL sector pie. I mean, again, the mentioning of the typical LTL shipments, moving up the ladder from parcel to LTL to truckload. When you talk about the e-commerce sector, and it is growing tremendously. It is really a sector that used to be, coming out of people picked it up at a warehouse or at a retail big box store and then brought it home. Now it's moving in much smaller size shipments, either from a DC to the final mile or to the residence, or sometimes from the shipper who made the product or imported the product to that final person. So it's almost a new kind of segment of LTL that I think only the sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's hope
Carl,
you can make your hamburger grow then on that side.
Certainly it will. That takes us to another trend that we've been seeing, and that is that just really the growth in what we consider to be the asset-light carriers. We see more of them entering the market each quarter, and they are really increasing the amount of competition that for carriers that in the past that have really relied on those interline agreements that they have in terms of hauling freight. And I think that if you look at that bottom, that kind of that Venn diagram about where we see those two fitting together, although I will say I've had more than a few shippers say to me that in this very tight capacity market that we find ourselves in, that they find themselves leaning a bit more towards the asset-based carriers simply because they think that there is some guarantee of equipment availability, and we have some statistics that will certainly speak to that. But if you look on the non-asset side, they also bring some benefits to the table in the sense that they have a plethora of, I think, partners that they could call on to offer those multimodal kind of options, as well as you'll see that in general there's a perception that they offer more services to the shippers as well. So, Carl,
Thanks,
it brings us to the point and really the meat of the presentation today.
Well, I think we're at a point of a crossroads, right? And Rob keeps talking about food, hamburgers, and pies, so I don't know which fork we ought to go down to get to that food or to the meat. But I think we're going to go turn right for just now and kind of lay out 5 rules. And again, unfortunately, due to time constraints, we're going to talk about 3 a little bit more in depth. And let me kind of set up the first one as far as the importance of picking your partners carefully, because that really is kind of a key to really being successful in this new world that we're entering into. And so one of the questions we asked our respondents last year was really about this whole idea about how do you really pick your transportation services, right? So what were the factors that you took into play? And really the first one shouldn't come as a shock for anyone. It's really this whole idea about cost. And we can say that, the long-term relationships are important, and capacity commitments, that ability to go ahead and do that are high as well. But, we're still an industry driven, unfortunately, maybe too much by this whole idea about cost. Also important on there was ability to respond to changes, that ease of doing business, right? So if there's a claim or there's some other change that has to occur, how quickly can I do that? And then also kind of interesting was the whole idea about the carrier's reputation. How important was that in the decision process? So, Rob, I'm going to throw you a question. And, if you start looking at the very high factors, what do you say to somebody who comes in and says, yeah, I want this really long-term, great relationship, and long-term for them is a one-year contract, and then they want the best price?
That's a challenge. Certainly, the cost in today's environment to go through a lengthy bid process, again, especially if it's a pretty large RFP, is pretty high. As an LTL carrier, we build our network around our customers, and that's our job throughout the year, 365 days a year, is coordinate to make sure our balance and our customers and where our customers' freight moves on a fairly regular basis, and try to optimize that. When there's a lot of quote-unquote turmoil or lack of the partnership, it does cause, I believe, LTL companies to take a step back and question the degree of real partnership. Again, in our network, we handle 45,000 bills a day. With 200 service centers, losing a large customer or gaining a small customer or a large customer in a specific market has pretty big ramifications on our balance and our network. So as we look out, we are looking for customers that certainly we recognize the cost of service is very important. American industry, American business is in a very, very competitive environment. And what we work to do is certainly have to drive out those costs that don't benefit anybody. The cost of providing the service, the extras that again go into that really don't benefit anybody. We work hard to try to eliminate those costs. So certainly that length of partnership is very, very important.
And Rob, I think you bring up something that's important. We all know this, but we don't really. At times, I think we forget it as well. It's the whole idea about the RFP process, right? Somebody says we're going to go ahead and do this, not really thinking through the consequences of what that cost is all about. And you're taking time and energy away from that relationship, that the potential to develop that by constantly bidding that out. So it's part on time. It's a significant cost for the carriers to have to go through, and it also adds in that you kind of alluded to this whole idea about uncertainty. What's it going to do to my network? And if I lose one or I gain a big one, there's some really big factors that really could impact the service that you provide all of your other customers because of that.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about that current state and how well transportation is performing. And Mary, I think you've got some good ideas on this.
Well, Carl, this is one of the hallmarks, I think, of our annual study that we do, is that we provide this scorecard. And it's just a simple compilation of 5 different service elements: on-time delivery, freight loss and damage, correct invoice, equipment availability, and the turndown ratio. And we've been able to confirm with our study participants that these are really what I'd consider to be those 5 big service elements. So you noted that from the previous slide that performance is really of very high importance to shippers. And if you take a look at these scores, you'll see that comparing 2013 to 2014, that we saw some what I consider to be some gains, and we saw some losses. Let's take those apart because, as I said, there are 5 elements that are there. So for truckload and LTL, what really happened in terms of making that score be lower? I'd say for all of the modes that are here at the 5, that on-time delivery essentially stayed the same from the previous year. So where we saw the difference in the scores going down for truckload and less than truckload was in correct invoice, in freight loss and damage, and it also had to do with equipment availability. If I look at the scores for rail and intermodal, I think what we're going to see this year is I think we're going to finally see the service challenges that those particular modes have had come to the forefront this year. So I'm anxious to see what those scores look like. So when we had these performance scores, we did something new this year with the study, and it's something that we really wanted to present today in the webinar and talk about, what happens to carriers when they try to create a competitive advantage. There's been a lot of talk about the commoditization of transportation itself. These next couple of slides are going to speak directly to the truckload market and then to the LTL, and we'll certainly ask Rob for his comments on all of them. But you'll notice here that we've got these 12 factors. And what we did this year in the study is that we listed I think Karl, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we enabled our study respondents to pull down from a list of 25 of the top truckload carriers, which covered a very large portion of the carriers, and there was also an other. And we asked them to rank them on these particular attributes in terms of the one being very good in terms of these factors. It was interesting because we also conducted some interviews with people like Rob and other leaders in the transportation industry about their perception across these factors. And by and large, what we heard, and Rob, I can't remember if on the LTL side, if your position on that, and certainly you can tell us that on the next slide, but there was this thought that perhaps that there's a great standardization in the quality of the services are really pretty much the same. But if you look at this slide for the truckload sector, we've tried to highlight in bold here the ones where we have the largest gap between the best truckload carrier and even just the third rank. So you can imagine what the gap would be as we start looking at 4th, 5th, and on down the list in terms of carriers. So let me point out where we have the largest gap, the talent of the key personnel. I think this is one we're also doing studies on just the talent shortage, not only in terms of drivers, but I think in supply chain and transportation and logistics in general. The second largest gap was in the equipment availability, or that commitment to the allocated equipment. Number 3 is that freight loss and damage. I read a report the other day that said for every dollar that we spend in terms of distribution, that 10 cents of that is in packaging and 90 cents of that is in the transportation. And perhaps it's time to reinvest some money in the packaging. And if you look, remember those previous scores where the freight loss and damage, certainly it's not just the carrier that bears the responsibility there. And I think this is a good area for that. And then where we have one of the other largest gap, the 4th ranked one, was the door-to-door competitive transportation rates or cost. And so I think we are still seeing some gaps in the marketplace relative to that. So if we look at the LTL side, then we'll see that some of those gaps got even larger. And at the top there we see reliability, particularly just in the transit time and then in that door-to-door, which is so critical. In fact, we had a company that contacted us that wants to look at their processes for measuring on time because what they found is that all of their supply chain partners take responsibility for a portion of it, but looking at it from door to door from the end customer perspective is very, very important. And now you'll see the equipment availability is also on this list, and the gap there is even larger between the first and the third ranked carrier. Rob, when you look at this list, is there anything that stands out to you in terms of being an opportunity for the LTL sector to work with their strategic partners on?
As I look at the differential between the previous slide on truckload carriers and then this slide of LTL, obviously the delta are significantly higher on the LTL side than on the previous slide that you had, and on the truckload side. Not sure of all the dynamics. I probably fewer LTL carriers rank, so maybe some of the measurements may be smaller or fewer carriers in that 1 to 3 range. But I do think transit time speaks very much to the current state of the business that we handle and being in a just-in-time environment. We see a lot of people that ship it today and want it yesterday, which supply chains are challenged sometimes in that degree. So transit time is the one that, again, before seeing this chart, I would have picked out as one of the most important things that my customers talk about. Equipment availability, I don't hear as much. I would have thought that number would have been higher on the truckload space, that differential. And again, the other factors, again, when you look at LTL carriers versus the previous slide, truckload, I'm surprised with the difference. Freight loss and damage certainly is high up on that number. So I think it speaks to choosing your partner and choosing your partner wisely. You mentioned, Mary, the packaging, 10% of the cost. A lot of the freight that I see as I walk your docks, I'm not sure when shrink wrap became a packaging and securing product the best possible way, because obviously shrink wrap can only doesn't protect. It certainly just holds shipments to a skid, and I see the shipments that I see probably less packaging today than I've ever seen as we handle freight. Very early on in my career, after washing trucks, but working on the dock, I was on a tow motor, and a trailer. The trailer was pulled out into the yard with me on it on the tow motor. And I recognized firsthand how much bounce there is on freight moving just in the yard, not much less moving down the road with our infrastructure in the U.S. highways with a lot of potholes. Having freight properly packaged by the shipping public is just so critical today as freight is moved. Again, referring to a previous slide, 944 miles from origin to destination. So,
yeah. I think, Rob, that you bring up an interesting point on there too, in that you talked a little bit about how important it is to pick the right partner in that partnership. And so if I think about these slides, really they're a one-sided slide, right? I pick the best partner. When I come to my third, fourth, or fifth carrier, it's a relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that for that third carrier that the third carrier was the primary carrier for that customer. And so they could have also just said, you know what, I'm not your top tier carrier, got it, but you're also not my top customer. And so there could be some of that difference that hits in there as well that may cause some of those differences. I have an eye on the clock, so let me very briefly and quickly kind of go through part 2 of our new rules on playing the same game, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mary to hit on the third one. And really is the new rule is really to play that same game. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that you really have to have a clear understanding about where you're headed. And if you start looking at the focus of companies in the past moving to today, the biggest strategy that people have employed or companies have employed is this idea about mix. I'm going to be all things to all people. Well, fortunately in 2014 that dropped a little bit, And what started to pick up instead are two. One was customer service, and the other was on cost leadership. So I'm going to go ahead and try to serve my customers better, and then I'm also going to go into that market and try to find ways to reduce out my cost. If I'm going to go ahead and do that and look at that, then maybe one way I need to think about that is picking the right partner that's going to help me achieve that. And what I mean by that is that there ought to be a strategy or framework that both a shipper would use and a carrier would use to actually drive that. So here's an example of a shipper's strategic framework. And they actually use this and present this to their carriers and say, this is what we want to be. We want to be a demand-driven supply chain leader. This is our house. This is how it's going to happen. This is what it takes in order for us to be successful. And what they'd like to see is alignment on that with the carriers. And so if you start looking at that to say, okay, what are our carriers doing? Do they have a similar map or a similar house? And if so, what does that look like? And so here's a carrier that was involved in our study, had a vision on their side. We want to be world-class transportation procurement that drives value to customers and providers, right? So how does that align with my customer, right? And so we're trying to see if we can get those two to mesh as we go forward. One big issue, though, really goes down to, well, what do people really trying to achieve? What do they really want to get? So if I want alignment, then really, my alignment ought to be shown on my goals as well. And this is really telling. So we've asked both carriers and shippers, what's your primary objective for the year? And if you start looking at the carriers, it's to maximize profitability, 38.8%. If you look at the shippers, what's their major primary objective of the year? It's to reduce our costs. And as we would say in I'm hoping that it's Star Trek. I might be dating myself. What we have here is a failure. Oh, no, this is a Cold Hands Luke. We have a failure.
Cold Hand Luke. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for bailing me out, Mary. So it really is.
Well, Carl, this slide was the background for really the whole theme of the webinar and the study this year about the tug of war that Mike referred to when he opened the webinar. And certainly it would seem like these two goals are not obtainable at all. And yet, in many ways, they are. And the way that we're going to get there, really, I think, is through communication. I like this quote, the next one we have on the slide, in terms of communications, the windshield wiper and the rainstorm of life. Many would say that the period of time that we find ourselves in and the challenges, certainly it's raining. And I think that the way that we're going to move beyond that and really create a win-win for everybody is through our third rule, which is the collaboration. And that is the rule that we're going to talk about to kind of wind up the webinar today. And so collaboration is really a game-winning strategy. There are a lot of people that would say that collaboration is a word that's overused. What I like to say is that collaboration is, I think, hasn't been operationalized enough in terms of the strategic partnership, the carriers to the shippers that we have, and that it's going to take some effort in that area to make sure that we get to that game-winning strategy. But we have a question for you now, and it's about alliances. Why is it that we see that we have some customers that want to form a strategic alliance and others do not? Rob, if you look at this, do you see any of these symptoms in terms of people that come to you that Karl had described the scenario, that they really want all the best of things that come from an alliance, yet they want it to be very short-term in nature, and, oh, by the way, they want the lowest possible cost because they don't understand what about the business?
Yeah, I would say that you're exactly right. Now we're seeing more customers come to the table wanting the collaboration and the alliance. But is the reason for that out of necessity, or is it really a change in corporate strategy? And that's one of the decisions I guess we have to make you mentioned collaboration was an overused word. Partnership is probably one that's even more overused. I like collaboration just because it does involve both sides of a relationship working closer together. In some situations when we're, again, trying to advance the collaboration, explaining the benefits sometimes is a little bit difficult. So sometimes we have to explain the benefits of collaboration, whether it's lowering cost, other than just the rates that are on the freight bill. So I do think, again, in the situation we are at now with capacity issues, collaboration and alliance are even more important than ever.
Yep. And in fact, the answer to this question is really all of the above. I think this quote by Henry Ford is really an appropriate one. As I said before, coming together, making that initial agreement can be the easiest part of it, but it's all hard work after that. If you think about the intensity of involvement and having this partnership or having this collaboration, it really runs the whole spectrum of anything from transitional to strategic. And I think that we're all pretty familiar with what are the implications if you don't share that same perspective. And so we asked a series of questions this year, or we presented some items to take an assessment to see if transportation really is becoming a commodity. And across these, I think, 16 factors that we asked about, there were some that we could say that shippers and carriers agreed on, somewhere we saw a gap, and somewhere there's really a sea divide. The four that we see that they're agreeing on would suggest that it is becoming a commodity. You can see those bullet points here. They say that they're highly standardized, both shippers and carriers. We say that they're relying heavily on price, companies are, when they choose a strategic or core carrier. When you recall the slide that Karl talked about, certainly that's the case. Reducing cost is still going to be a primary focus of many shippers. There's not a significant cost for switching volumes of freight, and the whole process for moving is fairly quick and easy. But however, there was one thing that stood out that suggested that perhaps it's not becoming a commodity, and that is this bottom item that you look at here, and that is that strategic or a core carrier is really very important in terms of helping companies really achieve their business objectives through the services they provide. Now, I talked a little bit about where we saw those gaps, and this next slide will show you where we have some differences of opinion, and I just want to point out a couple of them here for the sake of time. One of them, if you look at that, shippers think that it takes a fairly degree of sophisticated, specialized knowledge to be able to perform transportation. Carriers, I would say, that's a point that you need to kind of leverage and remind the shippers of the value that you bring. Rob talked about the network, the loss or an addition of a customer, what it does in terms of their density and their cost factors. The other one I would point out is in the middle in terms of those strategic and core carriers having multiple options. Shippers think that you do, but if you look at that network and if you look at the shortages and equipment availability, I think that we're seeing fewer of those options available. Where we have the largest gap, we can see on this next slide where we said it really is just time to talk. That if you look at the shippers think that they don't have frequent changes in the mix of their, core carriers, that they stay relatively the same, or that their requirements don't change all that frequently as well. Well, the carriers have a very different perspective, and I think what they're saying is, hold on a minute. So when we talk about this collaboration or this communication, I think these have to always come to the forefront. And I know that there are some carriers out there that are now providing scorecards for their customers, the shippers, and that's a talking point that they can have between them. So where do we stand on all these factors when we put them all together? If you look at this, those shippers that thought that transportation services are commodity focused, certainly when across all those scores, they are very firmly entrenched in that belief. On the other hand, if you look at the shippers that think that transportation is a value add, they're really kind of moving towards that neutral territory. So I think it's one of those lessons well learned or taken that I would say to the carriers that you have to constantly, I think, not only educate but promote the value that you bring to the shipper community. And I think that's something that we have to always be mindful of in doing. So, Karl, you're going to talk about this assessment that we can do that as a value add we're going to leave with our listeners today.
Absolutely, and I can do that because I unmuted my phone for the first time. So I didn't forget to do that. So, Mary talked about a little bit ago, it's time to talk, and it really is. And so one of the things we wanted to provide is kind of an assessment that you can go through as an exercise, carrier and shipper. If you think about relationships, rarely are they aligned. And if there's a way or an exercise to kind of see how you see the world, the next couple of slides will kind of give you some questions that you can kind of talk about. And so in order to do that, in order to be fair on time, let me just encourage you to go ahead and download those. And you'll see the scoring on the bottom, right? So if you have a transactional relationship or view of this area, hybrid or strategic, then you kind of get a sense on, are you aligned? And if not, where do you need to do? How can you discuss that to kind of go forward? So really, as Mary kind of talked about and we've kind of alluded to, we really are standing at a crossroads. And the road we want to take isn't success for just carriers or just shippers. We really want to go down that road together. How do we be successful as a group? And to do that. So Rob, maybe as a quick follow-up, again, we only got a few minutes left. Where do you see transportation headed over the next 2 or 3 years?
Whoa, in a few minutes. Certainly some of the challenges and opportunities that we've talked about in this presentation, certainly the driver shortage is going to continue. Again, some of the other challenges will continue. I do think opportunities for collaboration between service providers and customers needing service, the successful companies, we will see a greater sharing of information and a greater, again, not to overuse the word, but collaboration. One of your former slides talked about ocean. Me personally, I think we'll see a bigger growth in Mexico, which just because of varying degrees from ports to whatever. But whether this is a crossroads or we'll meet, the roads will circle back and meet at another time. That's the fun thing that has kept me in the business for 40 years. I love logistics.
Thanks, Rob. One of the things you brought up is really kind of one of our slide endings as far as on conclusions. And really it's this whole idea about collaboration and the environment may be driving shippers and carriers to the table to really talk about to be effective. Mary, do you have one final thought on this as well?
No, I think that if we look at the 3 points here, I think, as Rob had said, the collaboration, I think we're going to see a lot more people get serious about that. And I think that when we talk about how often we rebid our transportation before we sit down with our partners to see if they have a solution that's going to be more efficient and effective for us, I think we're going to see that happen as we see more of these conditions worsen before they get better.
Mm-hmm. Mary, thanks so much for that, too. So let me encourage everybody that's attending now that if you looked at your webcast console, to go ahead and please provide feedback to the session. And when you're on that console, you should be able to download the slides and also report that Mary, I, and some others wrote on the new tenets of transportation. So you're more than delighted to have that as well. And so, Mike, thank you again for moderating our session and allowing us to be a part of today's webcast.
Well, terrific job, Karl, Mary, Rob. Guys, just an awesome job of going through a lot of great data and putting it into terrific context. Rob, it's great to have your insight, too, from your unique perspective from the carrier side. I'm going to remind everybody, we do have time to actually submit some more questions here. We're up against the clock, unfortunately, so we're not going to be able to get to a whole lot of questions today, but every question that's been asked and submitted during this terrific session will be packaged up and emailed off to Karl, Mary, and Rob, and those guys can get back to you via email with their answers, with their answers to those questions today. I just want to kind of take us out, and I'm going to put the slide back up, guys, as we just quickly sort of wrap up here. And I'm going to just ask. I'm just going to go around the horn just for the last couple of minutes that we have remaining, and to leave our attendees today with maybe that one sort of key takeaway when you think about our shipper shipper audience out there, is there one or two maybe key takeaways that they can kind of have resonate in their minds after all this great data and after all this great insight and suggestions we had for them today in helping them to get to a more collaborative mindset? Mary, you did a great job there in the last few moments of wrapping things up. And I'll start with you, Mary, if you don't mind. What would be that one key takeaway to help get our shipper audience into more of a collaborative mindset to get us through this crossroads and get to the table with our carriers to do a better job?
Well, I think the shipper strategic framework that Karl talked about in that slide, it always surprises me at how many firms and really are masters of logistics or large shippers that we have that don't have something of that nature, which tells me that they really don't have a direction or a focus that they can even articulate internally. And I think that's absolutely essential that they have that.
Yep. Great starting point. Karl, to you, what would be that last key takeaway to get these folks into that collaborative state of mind?
Yep, I think for the carriers and shippers, my encouragement would be to treat each other as a partner and to really think about the long term, that you're in this together. And long-term isn't a yearly contract, It's how do we solve problems together? Because that's really a key word. I can't solve issues or problems by myself, but together you certainly can. And you can be a lot more effective in the marketplace if you look at it that way.
Right, absolutely. And Rob, from your unique perspective from the carrier side, any last sort of takeaway to help shippers get into that frame of mind?
I would just say that the opportunity to sit down and discuss cost drivers and really work with your core carrier, your carrier that you choose, and really try to drive out those costs that really aren't the essential cost of picking up the freight at point A and delivering at point B has got to be a major discussion. And you can only have that discussion if you're moving away from a transactional approach and moving more to a relationship approach. And you will never get to driving out those final percentage points of cost by doing totally transactional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our data really supports that, Rob, and it's a great way to wrap things up today. Karl, Mandrodt, Mary Holcomb, Rob Estes, terrific job today in taking us through such great data, and we really appreciate your insight and support today. And also, too, I want to thank everybody for attending, and make sure to look for your emails from either Karl, Mary, or Rob in terms of answering those questions that were submitted today. And we also want to thank SMC3 for making today's terrific session possible. Well, thank you guys for taking part today. We really appreciate it, and we want to thank everybody for attending, and have a terrific day.